You're muted, Ab.
There, sorry, hate when I do that. Sorry, y'all. But I was just saying thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thank you for joining me for this session. Really excited to be here. I love participating in AFC, and today I'm going to be talking about one of the major initiatives of the Florida Student Success Center, which is our Guided Pathways initiative, the Florida Pathways Institute. I've presented on this topic before at AFC. You may have heard me talk about it, but today I will be talking a little bit more. I have some updates to share about what's been going on at our institutions. But before we dive into the pathways piece, I want to provide an overview of what the Student Success Center is and kind of orient you all to the context of our work. So this is a question I get a lot. What is the Florida Student Success Center? We are housed within the Division of Florida Colleges, so we are in the Department of Education, but I like to say that I have the fun job in the division. It's really not the more compliance-oriented work that you may think of when you think of state government work, but we work with the Florida college system to support them in their efforts to create student-centered pathways with the ultimate goal of increasing completion rates. I'm sure you're all familiar, nationally, community colleges have historically focused on access and, providing lots of options to students, which they have historically done very, very well. But if we look at completion rates across the board at two-year institutions, they are still shockingly low. In the Florida college system, the 150% completion rate is hovering around 40%. So we just have too many students who are coming in and not completing that credential, which, has pretty significant implications for them in terms of what their future employment options may be, future earnings. So it's a pretty significant problem that we're seeing nationally, of course, not just in Florida. So given some of the issues that we've seen historically with community college student success, many states, including Florida, have established a student success center. So we are part of a national network of states that have a center very similar to ours, that are all working with, at their state level, working with colleges on student success initiatives, and Guided Pathways, which I'll be talking about today, has been a very big part of that. We are still relatively new to the game. The first center was established in Arkansas in 2010, and the Florida Student Success Center was launched in 2018. So we've been operating for about 3 years with generous funding from the Helios Education Foundation. But it's really great being part of this national network, especially being a newer member of the network. We really have access to a lot of resources, a lot of experts, information about what's worked and what's not in other states. So it's a real benefit to our state to have a center like this. So the role that statewide student success centers play, and this graphic kind of breaks down the 5 buckets of the work that success centers do, and this applies to Florida Center, but also nationally. So we have work with research and knowledge development. We work with and partner with external researchers like the Community College Research Center to conduct and disseminate research related to student success initiatives. We're currently working with them on a project related to dual enrollment, just as an example. Improving data capacity. I'll talk a little bit later today about a key performance indicator dashboard that we've developed to help our colleges monitor the success of their implementation of student success initiatives. We are a major convener, and that's another thing I'll talk about today, but we have the capacity, to bring folks together either at major convenings, virtual convenings, work groups, to work on student success initiatives, connecting policy and practice. That's been a major area for us, particularly in mathematics redesign, which isn't the focus of today's presentation, but we've done a lot of work with math redesign that's actually ended up in state policy. And then just providing coherence. We're kind of a central entity that provides coherence for our state in terms of student success goals. There's so much going on at all our institutions, a lot of great work, and we're kind of a central entity to bring folks together, to learn from each other, and really promote reform on a statewide level. So some of our major initiatives to date in the past 3 years, I mentioned mathematics redesign has been a major one. That was the first major undertaking of the Student Success Center. And you may have heard there was legislation that passed during the 2021 legislative session that requires common math pathways to be implemented at public post-secondary institutions in Florida. And that legislation grew directly from math redesign work that was informed by the Florida Student Success Center. So that was a really exciting development and kind of shows the power behind the work of the center. Guided pathways, of course, which I will be talking about today. We've also done some work related to alternative placement methods, particularly kind of at the height of the pandemic. There was also recent legislation in that area. And then we facilitated a statewide work group for associate and science degree general education requirements, which again, there was legislation this year related to that as well. So we really work kind of across the board on various initiatives that all relate back to kind of that pathways and student success theme. So before we dive into talking about what the Florida Pathways Institute is and how it's been operating, I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of bring it back to, okay, why are we doing this in the first place? So I have a series of questions that I'll show on the screen that I want to ask participants, and you can either, I think most of you have your camera off, so perhaps just put in your answer in the chat. So the first one I want to ask is, did you change your major while you were in college? So feel free to put your answer in the chat. No, 3 times. Yes, yes, with an exclamation point. No. So kind of a mixed bag of yeses and nos. I know I certainly did. I had no idea what I wanted to do. But this is a kind of common experience of coming in, not being sure what you want to do, and changing your major. So we have various responses there. Were you a first-generation student? Were you the first in your family to go to college? No, no, yes. Mixed responses again, quite a few yeses. Okay. Did you work while you were in college? Everyone's saying yes there. 2 jobs, wow. Yes, full-time. So pretty much everyone said yes to that one. Okay. Did you attend part-time college? 1 yes, only my first semester, but mostly no's to this one. Yeah, I did not attend part-time. I think this is the last one. Did you transfer or attend more than 1 institution? Yes, no, no. Okay, so we have a pretty mixed bag here of responses. Oh, one of our colleges to UF. Very cool. I went to UF. Go Gators. Great. So thank you for providing. Oh, Seminole State to UCF. Great. Thank you for participating in that. NBC to FIU. Go Sharks. I think it was mentioned in the beginning, but before this role, I was at Miami-Dade College for several years. Great. So the purpose of that exercise is to really get us thinking about what our typical community college student looks like and what their experience is. I know many of us, I know myself included, I had a very traditional college experience, straight out of high school to a university. I attended full-time, I didn't have to work during the school year. I just worked over the summers. But as what we know, most of our students at Florida college system institutions don't have that college experience. So this graphic on the screen, and I won't read through every step, but it's really meant to show at what happens at more of a traditional cafeteria model community college, where a student, it's open access, so a student comes in, but then there's just so many options, so many different routes to take, and not a clear pathway to success, and not the supports in place to help that student make sure that they stay on that pathway. So this is just showing the experience of a first generation student coming in, right out of the bat. They're confused by the FAFSA, they delay their college entry, they get a part-time job, they miss the financial aid deadline, so they just enroll in college part-time. They take a placement test and they're misplaced, so they have to they enroll in Dev Ed, so they're in a long Dev Ed sequence before they can get to college credit work, and it kind of just keeps going on and on. They begin Gen Ed, they declare the AS the program of study, but they take the wrong math. They self-advise, they're not, which they don't have that clear pathway of what they need to be taking every semester. So they self-advise and take the wrong courses that don't apply to their program of study, switch their major to AA, told by their advisor, many of their credits won't transfer, on and on, struggling with coursework. And at the end of the day, they don't meet satisfactory academic progress requirements, so they temporarily lose financial aid, go back to part-time enrollment, and at the end of the day, they have completed 52 credits in 5 years, of which 34 count towards the AA degree. So they've invested all of that time, all of that money, and they're only about halfway done with an associate in arts degree. And this is a pretty, common experience for students historically at the more cafeteria model college. And that's a phrase I think was coined by the Community College Research Center that's done a lot of work with pathways. But here is another graphic that kind of shows what the student experience is like at a cafeteria model college. Paths to student goals aren't clear. Intake up front of a student kind of sorts and diverts students. Their progress isn't monitored once they declare a program of study. Learning outcomes aren't clearly defined and assessed across programs. So as a result, we see a lot of, student churning and not really making progress, early transfer, low completion rates, excess credits because they're taking classes that they don't need for their program of study, and it extends time to their degree. So then when Guided Pathways comes in, it is intended to kind of address some of these issues. So at a Guided Pathways college, when a student enters, there are clear roadmaps to student goals. Student intake up front is redesigned as an on-ramp into a program of study. Their progress throughout is closely tracked, and there's proactive outreach if a student's falling off path, and learning outcomes are assessed and aligned across programs. So as a result, we see kind of the opposite happening with churning, early transfer, completion, excess credits, time to degree, etc. So that's kind of a big picture overview of why the Guided Pathways movement has really taken off and why this is an initiative of the Florida college system. So overall, when a student enters a Guided Pathways college, instead of that first graphic I showed where zigzags all over the place, they enter, they onboard, they receive advising and career planning services up front. They have a clear program map that guides their course taking semester by semester, rather than what we often see, which is a list of 50 courses and it's pick one. Student progress is monitored and support is provided when needed. Courses are available when the student needs them for completion, and students have the opportunity to apply their learning through more work-based learning opportunities. So, Guided Pathways explained, I just talked about kind of what a Guided Pathways college looks like once Pathways has been implemented, but what exactly is the Guided Pathways model it's really, I don't want to use the term initiative because it's really not an initiative. It's not something that a college, takes on for 1 to 2 years and then as a flavor of the week and then moves on to the next thing. It's really an integrated and institution-wide approach to comprehensive institutional reform. It's really grounded in providing a clear roadmap for students, so program maps and showing students exactly what courses they need to take every semester is a huge part of it. But there's also a lot of other things that go into the pathways model. It's really a leadership-led culture shift at an institution, takes significant investment to generate this type of institutional change. And it's really a heavy undertaking that really touches all aspects of an institution. So nationally, the Pathways model, as I mentioned, we have the Student Success Center network that has 16 states that are engaged in this work. The Community College Research Center also monitors implementation across the country. So there are colleges in states that don't have a center that are also doing guided pathways work. But it really boils down to these 4 pillars. And this is, again, a national model that many institutions are following. But the 4 pillars of guided pathways reform are create clear curricular pathways to employment and further education. So that's really where the program mapping comes in. Help students choose and enter their pathways. So when we're looking at onboarding practices, orientation, advising, career services upfront for a student. That 3rd pathway is help students stay on a path. So that's where a lot of the, sorry, my printer is possessed and makes noises randomly. Sorry about that. But this is where, monitoring students comes in, providing the supports as needed to ensure their success. And then the 4th pillar of guided pathways is ensuring that students are learning. So pathways, if we're not looking at what's going on in the classroom, that's where students really spend the most of their time, and their interaction with faculty is often the most impactful in their college experience. So the Pathways model also looks at teaching and learning and exploring and assessing learning outcomes. So that takes a very, very large comprehensive institutional reform strategy and boils it down to 4 pillars. It seems, I think, kind of common sense and perhaps overly simplistic at face value, but each of these 4 pillars has associated essential practices that fall within each pillar. And the Community College Research Center developed a scale of adoption assessment that's organized by those 4 pillars, and then it has numerous essential practices within each one that colleges can use to evaluate their progress in implementing pathways. So it kind of tells them what they need to do in order to implement pathways, and then allows them to evaluate how their implementation is going. So I've put a few examples of what those essential practices are on this slide. I didn't want to put all of them because there are quite a few. But it just gives you kind of an idea how the scale of adoption assessment really contextualizes those 4 pillars and makes it actionable for institutions. So for pillar 1, which has to do with mapping the pathways, one of the essential practices is every program is well designed to guide and prepare students to enter employment and further education in fields of importance to the college's service area. An example of an essential practice in pillar 2, which is helping students choose and enter a program pathway. An essential practice is every student is helped to explore career and college options, choose a program of study, and develop a full program plan as soon as possible. And then pillar 3, keeping students on a path. One of the essential practices is advisors monitor which program every student is in and how far along the student is toward completing program requirements. And then for the 4th pillar of ensuring students are learning, one of the practices is program learning outcomes are aligned with the requirements for success and further education and employment outcomes targeted by each program. So as I mentioned, there are numerous specific actionable practices like this under each pillar that colleges that have undertaken guided pathways as an institutional reform strategy are working to implement. I will say there has been research done on some of the early adopters of the guided pathways model, and that research has indicated that fully implementing pathways can take anywhere from 8 to 10 years. It's a very heavy lift, lots of change, lots of investment of resources and time. So this is just to kind of give you a sense of exactly what it looks like on the ground. So that leads us to the Florida Pathways Institute. So as I mentioned, pathways implementation, very, very heavy lift. A lot of time, a lot of resources, a lot of money. So nationally, there was recognition that institutions really need support and guidance in this work. So I want to say around 2015-ish, the American Association of Community Colleges launched the Pathways Project. And this was a national program that community colleges across the country were eligible to apply to participate in. 4 Florida college system institutions were part of that first AACC Pathways Project: Broward, Indian River, St. Pete, and TCC. So they went through a cohort model that was grounded in convenings that were aligned with the pillars of the guided pathways model. They received coaching. There was partnership with Achieving the Dream, I believe. But they were kind of pioneers in this pathways reform movement. And since then, several states have adopted state versions of what AACC did with the Pathways Project. And that's what the Florida Pathways Institute is. It's really a Floridized version of the Pathways Project that's intended to help our colleges implement pathways to dramatically boost completion and improve the social and economic mobility of graduates within our system. So how that works is, about 2 years ago at this point, we put out the application to join the Florida Pathways Institute, and we had 12 of our colleges apply to participate. I will say we were, we would have been happy with 4 or 5. That's what we were expecting. And so we were very, pleasantly surprised that almost half our system wanted to engage in this work. And I think that kind of speaks to the importance of the work. And now that the AACC has gone through 2 cohorts on the national scale, we have several colleges in Florida who are kind of early pioneers in this work. There's early indicators that this is working and it's impactful and powerful. So we had several colleges join. And I will note that one of those colleges that joined was Broward College. And as I mentioned, they also participated in the first cohort of the AACC Pathways Project. And Broward is really known as kind of a national model for guided pathways implementation. But they still feel like they have work to do, and they joined on to our institute, and we were very, we're thrilled to have them. But I think it also shows kind of the ongoing, the work is never done of guided pathways. But what this looks like is 12 colleges signed on and dedicated to work with us for a period of 2 years on receiving support and guidance and resources related to pathways implementation. So what that's looked like is they administered the scale of adoption assessment that I mentioned earlier with those essential practices for pathways implementation campus-wide in fall of 2019, and that gave them kind of a place to start so they could assess this is where we are now and where we want to go. And then we just had them do it again this fall recently to help them monitor their progress and continue planning into the future. From the scale of adoption assessment, we were able to see that our 12 colleges participating in this, they're kind of across the board in terms of where they were in implementation. We had Broward, which was obviously very far along, and then we had some other colleges that were just starting out in this work. So it really has diversity of institutions in our cohort, which has been great. They have been participating in convenings hosted by the center. We have brought in national experts from Community College Research Center, from other institutions, from Achieving the Dream, to kind of share their experiences with Pathways. And we've had every convening that we have allows for significant time for college teams to work together. We provide them an action plan that's related to the theme of that institute. And it really is a place for colleges, you know, you're in a room together, really dedicated time to work on Pathways implementation. We also have a team of Pathways coaches. We call them Pathways navigators. We have a group of about 20 folks. They work in Florida college system institutions in various capacities. We've trained them on Pathways, but also just, you know, facilitation and working with colleges in kind of a coaching capacity. So all of our colleges have a coach who works with them, a navigator at our institutes. And then we also have a data component that I'll talk about in a moment. So these are the 12 colleges that are participating in our institute. I won't read them all off, but you can see there's a mix of large colleges, small colleges, urban, rural, all across the state. So we've had a really great cohort participating. Some of you may see your colleges listed here. And our convening schedule, so we launched our first convening in the fall of 2020. And each of our convenings are kind of loosely aligned to those 4 pillars of the Pathways model. The first one really focused on kind of building momentum for that transformation at scale. The second was very focused on mapping to transfer and employment. The third convening, which just happened last month, which was our first face-to-face convening, was onboarding and student success, are really focused on those student supports. And then our final convening will be in the spring of 2022, and that one is going to focus on teaching and learning. So we are in the process of planning for that now. And I will note, so this fall 2021 was our first face-to-face convening. The first 2, if you look at the dates, happened at the height of the pandemic. They were obviously virtual. But, you know, when the pandemic hit, it was not long before we were going to have our first Florida Pathways Institute convening, and we really weren't sure if the cohort would want to continue. You know, everything was we were all in such crisis mode at the time. There was so much uncertainty. We called a meeting with the Pathways team leads from our cohort to really just have an honest conversation. You know, is this still a priority for you? Do you need to delay? You know, do you have other priorities that you need to be taken care of now, considering the state of the world at that time? And we heard a very resounding, no, we want to continue with this work. It's now even more important than ever. With the pandemic and all the uncertainty. So we kept going full steam ahead. And I think, again, that really spoke to the importance of this work and the value of the work, that despite the fact that, you know, the world had changed so much and things were so stressful and uncertain, this was a major priority for our colleges. I did want to share that we post all of our institute materials on our website, and I can share this PowerPoint as well with the link. But also, if you just Google Florida Student Success Center, you'll find our website, and there's a page on there for the Florida Pathways Institute. But we have PowerPoint slides up there. We have recordings from all of our speakers, materials. So there's a lot of really great information on our website. If this is something that's of interest to you, whether your college is participating in the Florida Pathways Institute or not, I welcome you to visit our website to learn a little bit more about what has been going on with FPI. So one other thing I wanted to note about our service delivery model for FPI is the data component. So we have created a Tableau interactive dashboard for our cohort colleges to use to help them monitor their progress. However, this dashboard, and the link is here on the screen. Again, I'll share these slides. But we created the dashboard for all 28 colleges. So it's not just the 12 in the cohort. So if you're at a college that is not participating, you still have access to this dashboard. But it is composed of key performance indicators and early momentum metrics that are correlated with student success and completion. One of the challenges with Pathways work is it takes so long to implement. And then if you can even call yourself a college that is fully implemented, it's still going to take a while for you to see the impact on completion. So how do we know what we're doing is working without having to wait, years down the road when we start seeing the actual impacts on completion rates? So AACC and the Community College Research Center, which again have been major national players in Pathways work, developed a set of key performance indicators that has been used on the national scale to track progress and success of Pathways work. So we, again, created a Florida version of this, and the dashboard has data for our system level as well as for each of our 28 colleges. And there's multiple years available. It's Tableau, so you can click various data points and years and make it give you the data and graphics that you're looking for. But we have in there multi-year fall FTIC cohort data. We have general demographics, metrics on credit accumulation, as well as program enrollments. And that's what's available on our website. I'll also note for our most recent institute, we provided these data broken down even more by student demographics. So data is such an important piece of guided pathways reform. It's difficult and change is scary, and there can be some resistance up front, when we start talking about limiting student options, changing policies and practices. And really the data, I think, is the most powerful tool to show the urgency and how much this reform is needed. So that's been a really key part of our institute model. Oh, 1 second. So that's kind of an overview of the model of FPI, the guided pathways framework, what's been happening on a national scale. And now we're at a point, so our FPI cohort 1 is over halfway through the institute. We have only one convening left that's coming up in the spring, and that will be the conclusion of the first cohort of FPI. So as I mentioned, we had our institutions complete their scale of adoption assessment again recently this fall to help them kind of track their progress and implementation. So this slide shows just a few examples. There were so many that I could put in here, but what fits on one slide I put on here that I pulled directly out of the scale of adoption assessments from our participating colleges that are just examples of what's been happening over the past year and a half since they've joined FPI. And I organized them by pillars of the model. So for pillar 1, creating the pathways for students, there was mention of implementing cloud-based dynamic program maps that adjust as program requirements may change. Website templates was huge. I saw that in a lot of the scale of adoption assessments, adding employment and transfer opportunities to their websites, really revamping the information that's available online for students, and working with four-year institutions on transfer maps to those partner institutions. Pillar 2, helping students enter the path. This one I thought was interesting, eliminating the undecided major option on the college application. So just totally taking that option away from students and instead supporting them up front during onboarding and narrowing down a pathway or a meta major to help start narrowing those options and making sure that the student is put on a path to success. I saw quite a bit of mention of initiating proactive student monitoring, outreach, and advising structures. So instead of waiting for students to come seek support, there's a lot of more proactive monitoring and outreach going on. And then there's quite a bit of mention of math pathways and aligning math requirements in each program of study. For Pillar 3, helping students stay on a path, quite a bit of mention of implementing case management or assigned advising model, so every student has an assigned advisor. Launching EAB Navigate, a couple colleges mentioned to help with the creating pathways online and then tracking students in their progress. And then creating AA program track codes. We all know there's only one AA degree in Florida. Our institute that focused on program mapping, day one was just dedicated to AA program mapping. A lot of colleges they're pretty far along with mapping the AS, more workforce-oriented programs, but the AA has been more of a challenge. So creating individual tracks within the AA with individual maps and codes within the college's system to track that. And then Pillar 4, ensuring students are learning. Examples I saw were revising course master outline to align curriculum development with the outcomes assessment process, and then developing common assessments for high enrollment courses. And again, these are just a few kind of snippets that I pulled out of their scale of adoption assessment, what they've been working on. But there's just been so much great work going on in a very short amount of time, which has been awesome to see. And of course, Pathways, the Florida Pathways Institute is 2 years. It's really designed to help kind of get the work off the ground. But this work is going to have to continue, into the future for years to come. I wanted to ask, I think we have enough time, if your college is participating in FPI, or even if not, are you aware of any recent developments in this space, kind of pathway centered, that's been going on at your colleges? Or just pause if anyone wants to jump in.
I can say that at Hillsborough, we're not participating in this project, but we have a pathways coordinator who is from the high school system, who is working with us very closely. And I work with them. I'm in workforce development side, and we work with her all the time. Our goal is to, because we have a lot of internal articulation agreements with our workforce programs and an AS program in management and a few other areas, that helps us transfer some credits from those programs into that AS program. And then of course we have a matriculation agreement with USF and several of those programs as well. So our goal is to really get the word out to students, letting them know that they can start a workforce program, articulate that to an AS program, and then eventually go on and get a higher level degree if they so choose. So we've been doing a lot of work in getting that out and making sure that people know about that and developing community partnerships in that way. I do also know that when this was also going on, we were doing a lot of auto-grading to try to help people complete, because we had a lot of students who had just a lot of credits, as you were talking about, that just never had completed. And then also doing a lot of calling to let students know, you're 95% done. All you need is this class or these classes in order to complete. So, but I'm surprised we're not engaged in this, hearing this information today, but I do know that we're talking a lot about career pathways, particularly.
Thank you for sharing. That's a really great example. And I think it highlights an important point. You know, we've talked a lot about pathways within the college, but it's not just limited to the college. The K-12 pipeline is a huge part of a student's pathway, and then, you know, onto university or workforce. So that's a really great example. And you mentioned your college isn't participating now. I'm going to talk a little bit at the end of this about kind of future opportunities. Does anyone else want to share any innovations or new developments at their college related to this? I like learning from others.
Hello?
Yes.
Do you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm from Miami-Dade College. We're not participating in this program, but I was looking at the third pillar that you showing on the screen, and we do have Navigate. We use EAB Navigate mostly for advising, but it's also being used for tutoring to track the academic support in the labs and in other spaces. And I would say it's been mixed results with Navigate. It's very good for the advising side, but not so much for the tutoring and for the academic support when it comes to non-advising areas. And then in the section about the AA program track codes, we do have different tracks in the School of Business for the AA program, and I would say most of the students are still in the main track, which is the General Business Administration, which is by far the largest enrollment in the whole college. But we've had some increases in the enrollment in the other tracks, for even though they all have the same degree at the end, but it helps a little bit with marketing the programs and trying to get students decided since the beginning what they're gonna do later. Even trying to get them transferred to our bachelor's programs because they are more aligned with one of the tracks as opposed to the other.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's what I would say that we are more involved with of all these pathways system.
Thank you. Yeah, those are really great examples. I know EAB, that was kind of starting when I left MDC. I know that's a huge lift to get that up and running. And MDC, you know, being a completion by design institution, is really an early innovator with a lot of pathways work before it was even called guided pathways. So thank you for sharing that. We have about 15 minutes left, I believe. So I'm going to go ahead and move on and talk a little bit about what's next. So as I mentioned, our Florida Pathways Institute Cohort 1 will be wrapping up this spring. So we've been putting some thought into, you know, what does the next iteration of FPI look like? And what we are looking at doing right now is, rather than doing another, you know, 2-year full guided pathways implementation cohort, we are going to be focusing on 1-year cohorts that are more topically focused, that can do kind of a deeper dive into specific topics that have been identified as high need within our system related to guided pathways. So this will allow us to serve other colleges that didn't participate in the first cohort, and also be able to continue to add value to those who are in our current cohort. So we are envisioning launching these in 2022, 23, and 24. We're still, you know, thinking through what those topics will be, but some that have kind of bubbled up through statewide conversations, Council of Presidents, the Councils of Instructional and Student Affairs, are transfer. That is a huge topic. Obviously very pathways related. You know, we don't want to just create pathways to completion. We want to create pathways to ensure student success in their goals to either transfer or enter the workforce. Enrollment and retention strategies, obviously, very significant right now. Dual enrollment and workforce alignment, particularly of AA degree programs. So these aren't set in stone right now. I just wanted to let you know kind of what's coming down the pipeline and opportunities to participate in the future with the 1-year cohorts. And I wanted to ask you all, we have these 4 topics that we're thinking about right now. Do you have any suggestions of areas where your college could potentially use more support with this type of institute model? So I'll pause for a second. If anyone has any thoughts, I'd welcome those.
Nothing new from Steve. You're right in line with some of the things we're dealing with, so I appreciate that.
Great, thank you.
Hi, this is Roger from Miami-Dade College, North Campus specifically. And thank you so much for this presentation, Abby. It was great, very, comprehensive. So I appreciate that. I just wanted to build a little bit on the workforce alignment piece. I am an academic advisor. And I think what I'd like to see, and maybe FBI can help with this across the system, is a deeper engagement with the workforce community, with our community college in terms of actual employment and internship placement. I think we're finally getting there with helping students realize what areas their degrees could work in. Once upon a time, well, not necessarily once upon a time, but so for example, if you're pursuing an AA in psychology, the automatic thinking is that, oh, you can just transfer to your bachelor's and continue a psychology degree and become a psychologist, right? But we know that that's not reality, that you don't necessarily have to use your degree in that field to be a successful part of a community. You could be a psychologist and work in a different field where psychology is still used, right? So, but I would like to see a stronger focus on actually getting students from starting their degrees and actually finding employment or an opportunity in their fields or in a field that's close, that's proximal, and having the community college play a better, deeper role in that. I think we're at a junction where parents and students and just society on a whole, and I know this happens in cycles every few years, people are starting to question the value of a degree now and saying, and they're romanticizing the trades, for example, and trade schools are very good at placement. And so they're romanticizing the trades and saying, what am I going to do with a degree in psychology? What am I going to do with a degree in criminal justice? A lot. But I think that we have kind of fallen down on actually getting students the opportunities once they finish. So I'd like to see a closer, deeper link there. Yeah.
That's really great feedback. And I think that could fit into that workforce alignment piece that we're looking at. But thank you. Any other suggestions? All right, well, feel free if you have any thoughts, you can drop in the chat or email me. I'm always looking for feedback and suggestions. But that brings me to the end of my formal presentation. I think we have a few minutes left. If anyone has any questions or comments, I'd be happy to answer them.
It's Steve. I just want to say thank you for sharing. This is super helpful because Pathways is still relatively new to me. I've only been in my position for 2 years, and we've really been pushing this to try to get folks not only to think smarter about the money that they're investing in the college, but also letting them know about their options, especially because I think pathways are very appealing to Generation Z, because especially when they have the ability to to bank credits and, earn, and use things smartly and efficiently and affordably. I think it can be really a good thing. And so I
Yeah.
just want to say thank you for the bigger picture. I'm glad I attended so that I have a bigger picture understanding from the state level of what's going on and not just our college's specific goals. So thank you for that. I appreciate
Sure.
it.
Thank you for the feedback. I'll just pause for a moment if anyone else has any questions or comments. All right. Hearing none, well, I just want to say thank you again for joining me, and feel free, as I mentioned, to reach out if you ever have any questions or if I can support you and your college's pathways work in any way. Feel free to reach out. So thank you.